I just feel like I've been around the block, ripping up fantasy stock, working around the clock. Look at the view from the top. Researching rookies a lot? No, I just be listening to pods. Yeah, one in particular, I'm just a messenger. Let me just pass on the rock. Browning, brunning, pruning, pronouncing ain't what he's doing. What he's doing is not losing, but infusing you with new things. And there's Dennis the Bennett, yeah. The man is a menace, yeah. Building a dynasty, some of the finest things. Promise you, you won't regret it. Sly as a fox, cultured in pop. Give him his props. Here is a thought, here is a box, and you cannot compare them at all. So don't even try. Careful with the news, but when you use a take, I take up Tony Fire. I mean Dyer, because anyone else is a huge mistake. Whoa, fantasy round table, fantasy round table, yeah. Fantasy round table, come take a look at the crown, baby. Hey, fantasy round table, fantasy round table, woo. Fantasy round table, come take a look at the crown, baby. Go.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Fantasy Football Roundtable Podcast. It is Tuesday. The Divisional Round is in the books. The College Football National Championship also in the books. And at least one of those things has Dennis happy, even if he's not warm.
Well, yes, I'm very happy the Buckeyes won last night. Sad about my Lions. But to be fair, I'm a very pragmatic individual. And I've been saying all along that the Lions defense just had too many injuries to be able to make a run. I just felt like when you get a couple games into the playoffs, the offenses are good enough and the defenses are good enough that the Lions defense would not be able to hold up. And then when you add in, Jamison Williams interception spree, and Jared Goff, I guess we'll include him. When the Lions, the Lions are kind of like the old Mike Martz Cardinals. Some games you're just going to have a ton of turnovers and you just got to get over it and move on and just keep trying to score points. Sometimes you pull it out like they did earlier this year when they won a 5-interception game. Sometimes, more often than not, when you turn it over 4 times, you lose.
Well, with the Lions now out, that left Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn free to take head coaching jobs. It looks like Aaron Glenn is closing in potentially on the Jets. We'll probably know more by the time we come on Friday. But Ben Johnson agreed to a deal to become the head coach of the Chicago Bears. A little bit of a mild surprise. A lot of people at the end of Saturday's game thought he was leaning toward the Raiders, but instead goes with the Bears. How do you like the fit?
I think with Johnson, it's more about what did he learn from Dan Campbell as far as how does everything work together? I'll be the first to admit, was not super high on the Campbell hiring. I just felt like his rah-rah stuff was going to get old. But he's rallied. The team loves playing for him. The front office loves working with him. Him and Brad Holmes are on the same page. Unfortunately, we're going to lose both of our coordinators this offseason, it looks. Looks like we're losing our defensive line coach to Mike Vrabel. That guy had worked with Vrabel for 5 years in Tennessee. So there's a lot of work to be done as far as the Lions go. With Ben Johnson, we know he's extremely creative offensively. How tightly is he going to hold on to that offense? Is he going to be the head coach and offensive coordinator? We've seen a lot of guys hang their hat on, well, being the OC is what got me this job, so I'm going to keep doing it. But a lot of times it ends up being too big a job for somebody to handle. We've seen Sean McVay be successful with it. Will Johnson, I think he's got weapons with the receivers, with DeAndre Swift, with Caleb Williams. They need help on the offensive line. One thing the Lions had a lot of was high-end offensive linemen. I think Johnson is going to work to fortify the team from the inside out, because it doesn't matter how creative you are. If within a half a second of the snap of the ball, the quarterback is under pressure. So I think Johnson has learned that. It'll be interesting to see who he brings in as his defensive coordinator. I expect it'll be somebody that has previous head coaching experience, will be able to build the team, and he's going to look back at Detroit and see what Dan Campbell did, bringing in Aaron Glenn. And so you've got a young offensive mind, bring in somebody that's fairly proven, get a good quarterbacks coach. I think it's going to be a good fit. You never really know, though. Unfortunately, the Lions lost the game Saturday. We lost a lot of talent off our coaching staff this week. I don't know if I'm not going to say our window's closing, but Campbell's got a lot of work to do. On the flip side, I think he's created an atmosphere that coaches want to go coach in.
Yeah, and I'll be curious to see who they get. They still have a good roster, so we'll see how that shapes up. A couple other coordinator hires. Lou Anarumo, who was fired by the Bengals, has landed as defensive coordinator for the Indianapolis Colts, and the Patriots have brought in Josh McDaniels to be the offensive coordinator for Mike Vrabel. What do you think of those hires?
I think Anarumo should have been kept by Cincinnati. I know they had a bad year this year, but over his tenure in Cincinnati, he's done some making chicken salad out of chicken feathers. And when you don't give him a ton of talent, he did the best he could. This just wasn't a good year. I get it. Somebody's got to – you're not going to fire the players, or at least not all of them. And so Anarumo's the guy who took the fall. I think it's a testament that it didn't take him long to land another job. And we'll have to see how much of the roster in Indianapolis will work with his scheme. How well will he adapt his scheme to the talent that he has? That's going to be an interesting look. I saw a blurb earlier today that mentioned about 3 or 4 players that they felt would be a good fit for his scheme, but they were going to have to bring in, especially in the defensive backs, bring in some different type of talent there to be able to play the type of defense that he's historically played. We'll see how well does he adjust what he does to the talent he has on the team, or will he overhaul that defense and bring in a lot of, we see it all the time. Coaches go somewhere and they bring in former players that may not be starters, but they know the program, and they work as on-field coaches to help the other players learn what to do, where to be.
Well, let's turn our attention to the games that took place on the field. The first was Saturday, and that was the Kansas City Chiefs hosting the Houston Texans, and the Chiefs and their probably best helpers, the officials, managed to get the 23-14 victory. Let's start by talking about the Texans. Tank Dell, there is no timeline for him to return. Stephon Diggs now a free agent. You would have said coming into this season they had an embarrassment of riches in skill position on offense. That doesn't feel like the case. As they end the season, do they need to go and get something else to go into 25?
Well, their embarrassment of riches, I think, turned out to be Dogecoin. So, I mean, they do. They have some really good players, but Stephon Diggs missed 11 games. Tank Dell missed 4. Nico Collins missed 4. There were struggles along the offensive line. They need to build from the inside out and maintain where they're at. They did have some younger players step up a little bit. Dameon Pierce seemed to figure out zone running, and there's another year left on his contract, so he'll be back to back up Joe Mixon. Xavier Hutchinson came on showed a little bit at the end of the season. Kate Stover looked okay playing behind Dalton Schultz. So they do have some good players. It seems that the Rose is wilted a little bit for Bobby Slowick there. There's talk about whether they want to move on from him. I don't think you do right now. I think you let him. You recognize that the offensive line was banged up. You were down, 19 games in your starting wide receivers. That's a big pill to swallow. As a Detroit Lions fan, I know that looking at what we lost along our defensive line. So I like what the Texans have, and I like where they're going. I like CJ Stroud a lot and Nico Collins. You always see somebody that takes a couple years to break out, and then year 3 they have a big year. And in fantasy, we spend that offseason going, is it fool's gold? Did he really break out? Is it gonna hold? Is he gonna stick? It looks like Nico Collins is the real deal. So I like where Houston is going. I don't know if Diggs will be back though. They rearranged his contract so they can get out of it.
No, he's a free agent. They cut it back to 1 year. He is a free agent.
So I don't think he's coming back. I think they're going to need to. I'm not sure Xavier Hutchinson is ready to be that role full time. So while they need to focus on offensive linemen, it wouldn't surprise me if maybe second round they look at a wide receiver, see if they can get somebody there.
Meanwhile, the Chiefs did just enough to advance. Patrick Mahomes making just enough plays. Kelsey 7 for 117 and a touchdown. I had speculated.
Wait, I thought he was washed.
I had speculated on Friday in my in my sell window that he might have a nice run in the playoffs here. And so I think it'll be interesting to see whether he can get it back and get it going as they go further into the AFC Championship game. So, I wasn't that shocked to see that Travis Kelce had a big game. He seems to constantly come through in those big playoff games. But how do Mahomes and Kelce just keep it going?
So they've played together long enough. The obvious answer is chemistry. And sorry, I think my power now. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Oh, all my stuff is flashing. Sorry. Freaking me out here. I think the ghost is here. The obvious answer is chemistry. They've played together for 5 or 6 years now, 7 years. And Kelce has always been the top dog there. Even when they had Tyreek Hill, Kelce still got a ton of volume. The last couple seasons, they haven't had that. And while Kelce, we can see the sunset coming. He's starting to fade. He's not as quick and agile, but he's smart. He knows how to find the hole in the zones. He knows what Patrick Mahomes is thinking when Mahomes has to move off of his spot. So they have exceptionally good play design with Andy Reid, but then you add on top of that just the trust and the chemistry that they have with each other. That's sort of the secret sauce that makes the Kansas City Chiefs go. And now, over the last 2 seasons, we've seen Steve Spagnuolo completely revamp this defense and make it a juggernaut. This defense, they sacked CJ Stroud, 8 times, 9 times? He was just constantly under pressure. And George Karlaftis and Chris Jones, they're relentless on defense now. And I think Spagnuolo, while he's probably going to get mentions for head coaching spots, maybe not so much this year, he's been there before. And he feels like a classic case of a guy that when he's a head coach, he's Peter principled. He's phenomenal defensive coordinator. And sometimes, man, you just got to find yourself a great head coach and you just stick with it and you just make a fat salary, for the next 10, 12, 15 years, whatever it is. Reed ain't going to be around that much longer, but you know what I mean? They can kind of keep rolling along and having a great team.
The other game on Saturday, we already talked about the Lions, so we won't spend a lot of time on them. The Commanders getting the 45-31 victory to advance. Dennis, quite a turnaround. The Commanders, who had the number 2 overall pick, a new coach, new offensive coordinator, new quarterback. Do you think they are in a position to be somewhat of a contender in the NFC for years to come?
When you have a talent like Jaden Reed, you're always in Jaden Daniels. You're always in contention. You just have to see, can everybody else lift it up? He brought the best out of Terry McLaurin. McLaurin has 1 year left on his contract. Hopefully they re-sign him. They're able to do that. Zach Ertz is rejuvenated. Zach Ertz makes Travis Kelce look like Brock Bowers. But Ertz is putting up numbers. De'Ami Brown is starting to flourish as the second wide receiver there. Their running backs are average at best. Brian Robinson, he's a grinder. He's a hashtag 2 to 3 year window guy. He gets by on volume if he can stay healthy. He's an okay pass catcher, but with Austin Eckler there, he gets overlooked in the passing game. If Robinson – I forget where he finished this year, but I know he was injured. But if Eckler wasn't there, it feels like Robinson could be a mid to low end RB2. With Eckler there taking the passing game, it feels like he's an RB3. They have to make sure they keep their offensive line intact. They need to build depth. We saw they lost Sam Cosmi in the Detroit game. And they were able to, they played well. Part of it was, Jared Goff turning the ball over. But when you have a quarterback like Jaden Daniels, and what makes me nervous is I look back and we saw Robert Griffin come in, very athletic, do a whole lot of things, and then get injured. Now, Daniels is much more, he's a little bulkier than Robert Griffin Jr. was. I think he's a smarter runner than Robert Griffin Jr. was. So I'm not as worried about him getting tore up in the legs like Griffin did. But that's always a risk when you have a quarterback that runs. And Daniels had 900 yards rushing this year or something like that. He led the team in rushing. So for me, it'll all hinge on, can Daniels stay healthy? And if he can stay healthy, they're going to have potential.
Yeah, and it would be Robert Griffin III.
Did I say junior?
Yeah. 891 rushing yards on 148 attempts for Jaden Daniels. And, he didn't miss any games, started all 17, was pretty durable. So that was definitely a question, though, that some were asking coming into the season.
Yeah, Detroit, man, they unfortunately were not able, with their defensive injuries, they just weren't able to overcome Goff's turnovers in this game. Marcus Davenport missed 15 games, Aiden Hutchinson 13 games, Aleem McNeil 4 games. Carlton Davis 4 games. Alex Anzalone missed 8 games. Malcolm Rodriguez is out. He was Anzalone's backup. So it was
weird play calling too, and people have commented that it seemed like Ben Johnson was already checked out. You have to wonder, that Jameson Williams interception, that entire play was a terrible idea.
It was a terrible idea, but they've been getting away with that stuff all season. And so they were in a position where they were down. They needed a spark. He tried something goofy. That's part of Ben Johnson's offense. I don't think he was checked out. I just think the play didn't work. There's always a bit of that. No. Yeah. When something works, And no, you're so stupid when it doesn't. And I think that's just all that is.
On Sunday, the first game, the Philadelphia Eagles winning 28-22 over the Los Angeles Rams. The Rams could not hold Saquon Barkley in check. He went for 205 yards after running for 255 against them in the regular season. Afterward, Matthew Stafford talked about his uncertain future. So did Cooper Kupp. What do you think happens with the Rams this offseason? Do you think they try to run it back one more time in 25? Do you think they start breaking up the band?
I think it depends on Matthew Stafford. They don't have a plan B at quarterback right now. Stetson Bennett ain't the answer. Jimmy Garoppolo, I think we've seen the best of him, and it wasn't that good. If they're going to run it back, it'll be all on the shoulders of Matthew Stafford returning. That being said, I expect Matthew Stafford to return. He's still got some in the tank. He's talented. Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua are good, but McVay has shown when those two go out, he can still get it done with the likes of Demarcus Robinson and Tutu Atwell and Jordan Whittington. And Kyron Williams was great. Do I expect Williams? I'm going to be on the sell Kyron Williams train this offseason in Dynasty because he's a 5'10", 200-pound running back that gets a lot of volume, and I just don't expect it to keep holding up. Well, I drafted him. I may be back in on redraft depending on the price. I drafted him in the roundtable redraft league this year, but I liked the price, and I was like, I'm not gonna go there in Dynasty, but in redraft, I'm good. Cooper Kupp said he's playing in 25. He's just not sure if it's with the Rams. I think he'll be back. I think he's done too much for them, and so the Rams offense, it's all predicated on Stafford coming back. I saw a mock draft today or an article, I forget. I think it was a mock draft, and they had projected Will Howard to the Rams in like the third round. Now, as a Buckeyes fan, I'm like, oh, great for Will Howard. I'm not sure Will Howard how good of a candidate he really is for the NFL. He got some things done here at Ohio State. He had a phenomenal season for us. The first half of the Texas game, if he could consistently pass like he did in that first half, then I'd be more into him as a pro prospect. But we didn't see that in the Notre Dame game. We didn't see it in the second half against Texas. But he's a guy that could come in and sit a year or two behind Stafford, and then you give him a shot and see. He's a heady player, smart player. And the way the Rams defense is shaping up, they have a pretty good defense. Some of the players they drafted, Braden Fisk, Jared Verse, Christian Rosenboom, they put some assets on the defensive side of the ball that would allow the Rams to not have to be, like the Lions were this year and having to score 35 points, 40 points a game to win. So we'll see. We'll keep an eye on Stafford this offseason.
Yeah, definitely see what he decides to do. Meanwhile, the Eagles will host the NFC Championship game. Do you think they're going to be the favorites going into next week?
Yeah. I don't know. Washington gives up the third most rushing yards, and the Eagles have Saquon Barkley. Kyron Williams had a really good game, 19 for 106 yards, and he was outgained by 100 yards by Saquon Barkley.
Yeah. Well, and that's going to probably be the key. They technically split those games. The Washington one, Jalen Hurts got knocked out early, and I think Pickett got knocked out in the end. That's when he broke his ribs. So
Tanner McKee ended up throwing a touchdown pass, and that ended up costing me a championship.
Yeah. So it'll be interesting, but I think you're right. I think Philly will be the favorites. Probably what ended up being the best of the 4 games, as we suspected it might. The Buffalo Bills hold on 27-25 to eliminate the Baltimore Ravens. Heartbreak for Lamar Jackson as he saw Mark Andrews have a huge fumble on a drive, and then at the end, after they scored an amazing touchdown, the 2-point conversion right in the breadbasket ends up on the ground. Lamar Jackson expressing a lot of frustration after the game. Now 3-5 in the playoffs, not a great playoff record. What do you think the Ravens need to be able to go further?
I think a healthy Zay Flowers would have benefited them. I know they're not the highest volume passing game, but there were times when I think he could have made some plays. Bateman had 5 targets. Tylan Wallace, Anthony Miller, Steve Sims, and Nelson Aguilar combined for 4 targets. So I think having a healthy Zay Flowers would have been beneficial. I don't know if that throw was in the breadbasket to Mark Andrews. It was about knee high. He was having to bend down. Should he have caught it? He should have caught it. Stuff happens. They can't be 0-3 in the turnover margin when they're playing a team like Buffalo. Buffalo's going to take advantage of that. And, because the weather was kind of crappy, it should have been a bigger Derrick Henry game. But the Ravens kept being in a deficit, whether it was field position or points, because of turnovers. And then they're trying to play in that snow, so they couldn't be as effective in the passing game. I mean, Jackson, the numbers look good, 18-25 for 254 with 2 touchdowns. It just feels like there wasn't the plays when they needed to make them. And I think Jackson is still, he's still one of the best quarterbacks in the league. Buffalo just is a good team, and they went up. It wasn't like, they didn't lose by 14 like Detroit did. It wasn't that their defense was porous and just giving up plays. Their defense was put in short field situations and, with turnovers and stuff. It was just one of those games that, every now and again you have one of those days where nothing just seems to go your way. You step out of your car and some jerk hits the mud puddle. Now you're covered in puddle water. You walk into the office and you drop your coffee. Some days just suck like that.
Meanwhile, for Buffalo, Josh Allen 3-1 against Patrick Mahomes in the regular season, 0-3 in the playoffs. It's been the playoffs that has been the bugaboo. He beat him again this regular season, but what do they have to do for Buffalo to get past Kansas City in the playoffs?
Well, Josh is going to have to do everything. I mean, he is that offense. Shakir, 6 of 7 for 67 yards. Allen didn't have any passing touchdowns, only threw it for 127 yards, and still was able to pull off the victory because Baltimore turned it over 3 times. I'm not looking for Kansas City to turn it over 3 times. So Allen is going to have to be able to get the passing game going. Well, if he's passing, that means Karlaftis and Jones are going to be coming at him. He's a big dude. He's 6'5", 240 pounds. He's mobile, great runner. It's going to be a fantastic matchup, but he's going to need one of these wide receivers to turn into, a can't miss guy for at least one game if they expect to beat Kansas City.
Yep. Well, that'll do it for looking at the games. Before we get out of here, we want to continue our dynasty look. We're going to talk about 5 buy lows for this off season. So, Dennis, I will let you kick it off. Who is your first buy low?
So it's interesting. When I looked at our list, we took a completely different approach. You kind of went young with your guys. Mine are kind of a little more established, maybe coming off some not great years. My youngest guy here is C.J. Stroud. I'm going to go with him. He was QB 18 this year. His passing yards regressed. His interception percentage was up. His offensive line gave up 14 more sacks than it did last year. So he took a little bit of a beating. The offensive, while, Joe Mixon came over and had a good year, their pass protection just wasn't as good. We talked earlier about the injuries that they had to their wide receiver crew. They've got to overcome that. Now they're going to have to replace Diggs, who looked good early in the season before he got injured. I think we're, based on what we saw with the Dell injury, we're probably not looking at him coming back next year, or at the very, very best, maybe super late in the year. So they're going to have, whether it's Hutchinson step up big or they bring in a free agent and hope that it gels. They're going to need somebody to work with to complement Nico Collins and to make sure that they're getting it done there. Mixon's going to be back, it looks. He's another year older. How well is he going to hold up? He's not ever been an efficient running back, but he's 230 pounds and he can rock with volume. He's a good pass catcher. He's a good all-around back. I think that we'll see more of that from him. Houston has to focus on the offensive line. They need to make some big improvements. They had some injuries there this year, and you never like to see that, but they do need to put some more talent on that offensive line. So that's what I'm going to be selling. Right now, Stroud is valued at right around the same value as the 101. If I can push that down and get a second half first round draft pick and trade that for Stroud, I'm going to go there. I feel like this was a not great year. I think he's better than this. He is mobile. We've seen him run a couple times. He just doesn't do it because he believes in his arm. He believes in his receivers. So he's not a guy you're going to expect to put up 300, 400 yards rushing, but he needs to get a little better at executing when he is on the run. So I like Stroud. I would give a late first to try to buy low on him. I think that's going to be a battle, but you'll find people that are they're going to go back to the helmet scouting. They're going to be like, oh, Ohio State can't produce good quarterbacks. Let me get out of this before it gets any worse.
Yeah, my first buy low is I guess you're right, is my oldest player on my list, and that's Baker Mayfield. And, he has had 2 incredible seasons in Tampa Bay with 2 different offensive coordinators. And I still don't think people realize what a boon he has been. I actually have him on a couple of dynasty teams, and I thought, well, he'll be an okay quarterback too. He really helped carry things. He was quarterback 10 last year, and I think a lot of people thought he was going to step down. He actually ended up finishing as quarterback 4 this year, but I just don't think there's the perception of him that way. You were talking about maybe you can get a late first to get CJ Stroud. I think if you offered a first, you can get Baker Mayfield, and the idea of him losing an offensive coordinator doesn't really scare me as much after what we've seen. He has had a million offensive coordinators, it seems like, throughout his career, and we've seen him do well. He seems to like where he's at. He seems to have matured into what we, always hoped he could be as a former number 1 overall pick. They still have a good core of players and some good young players coming up. So he is a player that I think, especially in Superflex, not a high cost. And if you can get a guy that's going to be a borderline QB1, and I think he still will be, he could be higher than that, as we saw this year. But I like what he's been doing, and I like his position there.
Yeah, I don't hate it. I do think at some point the fairy dust on the, it doesn't matter who the OC is, runs out, but he's playing good. Quasi breaking news from about a half an hour ago. Zach Rosenblatt is reporting, Zach Rosenblatt of The Athletic, that barring anything unexpected, Aaron Glenn should be named the Jets coach tomorrow.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see. The Jets. Who is your second player?
Well, I'm sticking with the quarterback again. And this is a challenging situation for this quarterback. He's coming off an injury and his team is a hot mess, but he's historically put up pretty good numbers. He's been well. Dak Prescott is my number 2. He was QB 20 through, I think, what was it, 8 games or whatever it was when he got injured. Not great. He was having an off year. Well, they lost 3 of their offensive linemen. They were trying to piecemeal the running back together with Rico Dowdle and you and me.
Zeke.
Brandon Cooks wasn't back from injury. There's a mess. So I think we're going to have a healthy Dak Prescott next year. We're going to have a healthy CeeDee Lamb. Tyler Smith is developing into one of the best left guards in the league. They're going to probably – everybody keeps mocking Ashton Jeanty to them at 12. And that's a Jerry Jones move. It is. But maybe Steven will hold some sway and Steven will be like, man, we really need to go offensive line. Let's kind of rebuild this. The running back class is deep. We can get somebody in the second that is going to be good. Probably not as good as Ashton Jeanty, but they're going to be good. So the Cowboys were 27th in rushing yards. Yes, they need to improve that. Some of that, a good portion of that, was their line just didn't play well this year. And so we expected that it was going to be a very pass-heavy team. Lots of CeeDee Lamb. Lamb was, I think he was wide receiver 5 on the year. They're going to have Jalen Tolbert back, who had somewhat of a breakout. Jake Ferguson. It remains to see who the new head coach is going to be. Jerry Jones, his process is what his process is. But in Dallas, that offense is going to run through Dak Prescott and CeeDee Lamb, regardless of who they bring in. If I can get Dak Prescott for a very late second, I think that's plus money there. If I can even get him for a very late first, a very late first in a super flex league, that's plus money. Even better, if I can ship off an early second, 201, 202, and another second round pick, and maybe a throw-in player to get Prescott away from somebody who's like, there's just too much uncertainty for me, and I got him. Now he's my QB2. I like making that move.
I mean, the big rumor is it's Kellen Moore, so I guess we will we'll see. My number 2 is Chase Brown. I went with the running back for the Bengals. I think the big question going into this, we had seen just such a small sample from Chase Brown as a rookie, and they brought in Zach Moss. How was that split going to work? And at the early part of the season, it didn't look incredible. They were definitely leaning toward Moss. Moss getting injured may have helped goose things, but Chase Brown actually finished as running back 10 this year. Went for 990 yards and 7 touchdowns, caught 54 passes. He definitely looked like a player that could carry a full workload and looked very explosive. I'm certain they'll have, whether it's Moss, still being there or bringing in something like when they went and got Khalil Herbert, they will have somebody as a complimentary back. But I think next year we see Brown going in, leading the way in that backfield. And I think there's still a lot of people out there that perceive him as, like a low end running back 2 or maybe a running back 3. And to me, there's some advantage and upside there. Will he finish as running back 10 again? Maybe not, but I think he can be at least a high end running back 2. We saw Joe Mixon, even when he wasn't efficient in that system, just because of the touches he got and because of the opportunities you get with that passing offense, be able to put up some decent fantasy numbers. And I think Chase Brown falls into that category for me.
For me though, my challenge is I'm not sure he's a buy low now coming off a breakout year. I feel like you're going to have to convince somebody that he's going to get committed because he played well.
I still, I was surprised how high he finished and what his stats were. I don't think there are a lot of people that are talking about him. And when you look at dynasty rankings and things that have come out, I don't see him vaulted way up there. I still see him in the 20s and 30s.
Fair enough. All right, so I went running back with my third guy. A little bit older, coming off a bad year on a team that just didn't quite gel. And there are times when you look at the talent and you just keep buying talent. You got to believe, and that's Jonathan Taylor. He finished his RB10, RB30, or no, RB10 is what I have here. My bad. I looked at my next guy who was
Jonathan Taylor was RB12.
I used 17 games. That's what the season is, so I went that route.
For some people.
Yeah. He's an immensely talented running back, and Anthony Richardson is already on the hot seat. You hear him talking, they need to bring in Justin Fields because he plays a similar style, and he's already proven to be able to do things Anthony Richardson can't. I don't know. I don't know if that's crazy or not, but having a running back as talented as Jonathan Taylor is going to help Anthony Richardson. The challenge will be, will they have the ball enough to be able to give Taylor enough volume to finish higher than RB10? He's valued around a mid first round pick. I think we've seen with injuries and this performance over the last couple of years, people are starting to sour on him. Now he's going into his 5th year now, I think. So there's going to be the age cliff people going, I want to get out of Jonathan Taylor. So I think there's going to be some buying opportunity if you're willing to believe that Shane Steichen can get that offense going and salvage Anthony Richardson. Or hell, if Anthony Richardson can just stay healthy.
Well, and I think, too, what helps you in a buy low is that there's some perception that Jonathan Taylor's stats get wounded when Anthony Richardson is in there. And he had some games that weren't spectacular when Richardson was there, but he had a lot of games that were fine. His receiving numbers are not spectacular when Richardson is in there, but he's still running well.
Well, did you hear Richardson's going to work this offseason with this coach? I think his name is Chris Hess. He does a lot of virtual reality stuff, and that's who Josh Allen worked with when Allen took his big leap from, it increased his completion percentage by 17%. Jaden Daniels does a lot of virtual reality work. And so it came out yesterday, I think, that Richardson is working with that coach Hess with the virtual reality to kind of create those habits and break the bad habits, create the good habits. So it'll be interesting to see. It used to be Troy Aikman was saying that he used to say he always believed accuracy is something you can't coach. You either are accurate or you're not. And he said that watching Josh Allen transform changed his mind about that. Well, now Richardson's working with the guy that Allen worked with. It'll be interesting to watch.
Yeah, a lot of room for improvement. My third guy, I went with Ricky Pearsall. He started out a little bit quiet as a rookie. He obviously had that unfortunate incident with the getting shot that prevented him from being out there at the beginning. And there's also a log jam at receiver. And you would say coming back into a second year, that log jam still kind of is there. A lot of the people that were bullish on him in rookie drafts last year was they thought Brandon Ayuk was going to move. Now he's on a long-term deal. What happens there? I still think they end up moving. I just think that they end up moving Deebo Samuel, as I mentioned last time. And I think we saw Ricky Pearsall as a good fit who really grew in this offense a lot more. If you look at the last 2 games of the season, he saw 18 targets, got 14 passes. I think we were kind of seeing him get more comfortable and get more active in there. Ayuk's going to be coming back off of an injury. I thought Pearsall and Juwan Jennings looked like the best and most consistent receivers for the 49ers this past year. I think there is a potential for him to take a big step up in year 2. And I think there's still a lot of confusion right now about the 49ers and all the weapons they have and all how that offense is going to work and if there's going to be enough target share. And to me, there's an opportunity if you have somebody that you want to take a shot on. And that's basically how I feel about Ricky Pearsall.
Yeah, I like what Pearsall brings to the table as a receiver. He's got really good hands. He's a good route runner. He's very athletic. I think with Brandon Ayuk coming back, I think we're in the same camp. We think they're going to move Deebo this offseason. And Juwan Jennings has shown that he can be the number 2. So that would put Pearsall at 3. Will Pearsall be able to step up if, because Brandon Ayuk would be the 1? That'll be the question. So let's see. And maybe Jennings goes back to being the 3 because that's where he has flourished. He broke out last year when there were injuries, but previous to that, he had been a pretty solid wide receiver 3. So I like the Pearsall. My next one is a wide receiver as well. And speaking of going through changes, this should be a super interesting offseason for DJ Moore. He finished as wide receiver 30. It may get tricky, but he feels like, my first note I wrote when I wrote this was he's in line to get the Amon-Ra St. Brown targets. And then I went and looked, and he only had 5 targets less than Amon-Ra St. Brown this year. And I'm like, all right, he's already getting those. So hopefully what happens is the Ben Johnson is able to kind of open up Caleb Williams and make things more efficient and more creative and be able to feature. You've got Roma Dunze, who's likely to be the Jameson Williams. And I do think DJ Moore will be the Amon-Ra St. Brown, the intermediate guy. Caleb Williams was 17th in passing yards on a train wreck offense this year. And don't get me wrong, Williams was partially to blame for that. So I think with DJ Moore, he's shown he's a very, very good receiver. I don't think he's elite, but he's very, very good. He's going to be 28 in April. It's kind of prime for wide receivers right now. So let's let Ben Johnson free him, put Caleb Williams in positions to be successful. I wouldn't be surprised if Chicago brings in a David Montgomery type back to pair with DeAndre Swift, so Swift can be their Jahmyr Gibbs, albeit the Temu version at this point of his career. But Ben Johnson he's got a good offensive concept, and I think it's really going to benefit DJ Moore. And I think he'll be able to, though, sell some of the uncertainty. And if you've got somebody that is that's not a Caleb Williams believer, that thinks, Johnson's just going to be moving on from him first chance he gets, you might be able to get DJ Moore fairly cheap. He's currently valued at about the pick 110. If you can get him for 2 seconds, a little bit lower first, I think you're going to win a little bit there.
Yeah, my next guy, I'm going with Jameson Williams. And I think he just had probably one of the quietest 1,000-yard seasons we've ever seen. Because when you talk about that offense, there's a lot of focus on the running backs, and they were definitely great, and on Amon-Ra St. Brown, and he has been incredible. But Jameson Williams got off to a little bit of a rough start in his career. That's that was certainly unescapably true. In between injuries and off the field stuff, we didn't see him really do a lot. Only had 25 career receptions for less than 400 yards coming into this year, but 91 targets, played in 15 games, stayed relatively healthy, got 58 for 1,001, had quite a few touchdowns, ended up actually finishing as wide receiver 22. I saw a lot of people, even as we were going into the last weeks of the season, ranking him in the wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4 range. He does kind of play a position, and at least in the offense that we saw last year, where you would have some boom and bust, and he definitely had some true bust games. But I think he was more consistent than you realize when you look at his week to week. He only had 2 games really that were below 5 points. He had another 3 games that were, high 8, mid 9. But then the rest of his games, were all double digits or better. And he has the ability to have some really explosive games. I think he, year 3, hardly a shock that he got better. We've seen young receivers get better. There was a reason that he was taken as a first-round draft pick, and I think that he fits pretty nicely into this, into the set of personnel that they have in Detroit. We'll have to see also what happens with the new offensive coordinator, but I don't think they're going to stop being aggressive or stop needing to put up points. So that may even be a bigger opportunity with people panicking now that Ben Johnson is gone. So I think Jameson Williams is a guy that you can get for less than what the return we saw this year.
I don't disagree with that. I think Jameson, when you draft Jameson Williams or you acquire Jameson Williams, you're signing on to the volatility. He's more consistent than you think, but there is some volatility in his game. And in his defense, while that pass was intercepted, it wasn't like he threw a duck. It could have been a little more accurate, but it was a decent pass. My final one, I'm going to dip into the tight end pool here. And I am a huge Mark Andrews fan. But I think we're seeing it come to a close in Baltimore. He's got 1 year left on his contract. He's getting ready to turn 30. And we've seen Isaiah Likely start to rise up. And for me, I want to get in on Likely before Andrews is out the door. Likely kind of reminds me of David Njoku. They're almost exactly the same size. They kind of got that sneaky, not even sneaky. They've got this athleticism that you really like in a tight end. I went to Kentley Platt's relative athletic score comp tool to see, because the way they move reminds me of each other. They're both a little bit low hipped. And so looking, they're virtually coming in. We're within 1 pound of each other in weight and like a half an inch of each other in height. Now, Likely wasn't as fast or didn't have quite as much explosion or wasn't as good change of direction as Njoku. Njoku's a phenomenal athlete. Likely's just a really good athlete. But Likely makes up for that, I think, with better hands. He's got better hands than Njoku. And with Andrews turning 30 next year, and would I be surprised if Andrews gets an extension? No. I think Baltimore is notoriously a team that keeps their own players when they can make a good deal. But I think Likely, he played 60% of the snaps this year. Mark Andrews played 61. They're both playing a lot. Andrews had a much better statistical year. He's clearly the starter, and when he's in there, he's going to get the targets. But if I can go get Isaiah Likely for a late second round pick, it might not pay off in 2025, but in 2026, I could have a top 5 tight end.
Yeah, for me, I'm taking a shot with my last one. I'm going with Jatavian Sanders. I liked the pick. I thought that was interesting when the Panthers went and got him in the draft. We saw, flashes, fits, and starts. I think he had a better year than you probably would have realized. Caught 33 passes, 342 yards, and a touchdown. But there was still plenty of competition. Kind of an evolving and growing offense. We saw the Panthers continue to get better down the stretch. Tommy Tremble is going to be a free agent now, as is Ian Thomas. That clears out a lot of the competition. And I think Jatavian Sanders going into year 2 is a guy that has a chance with his pass catching skills to settle into that role. This is a team that is looking for good pass catchers to put around Bryce Young. 95-year-old Adam Thielen can't be their man forever. They have a couple of good young receivers, potentially in Xavier Legette and Jalen Coker. Be curious to see what else they get, but I like Sanders to take a step forward in year 2. He is a guy that I would be going and scooping up that I think is going pretty far under the radar just based on not having a huge profile and people not really being in on the Panthers yet. Despite how strong I think they finished the season, there's still a little skepticism, and I get it. They've not been a great franchise for the last few years, maybe the last 10 years.
I like that a lot. I think Sanders is a very good athlete. I think he did, he's a good two-way tight end. He's not somebody that's going to come off the field in early down situations. Bryce Young really made a lot of improvement, and if they continue to take that next step, and I think they will, I think Canales has shown over his last 3 seasons, starting in Seattle, then Tampa, and now in Carolina, I think he's a pretty good coach. I think he's got that team headed in the right direction. It was amazing to kind of watch the patience that he had when Bryce Young fell apart early in the season and they put Dalton in. There was a time when I thought, you know what, it's over for Bryce Young. But when Young came back in, he played pretty good. And if they need a bona fide stud at wide receiver, I don't know if Xavier Legette's it. I don't know if Jalen Coker is it. Right now, they would both feel like at best number 2s.
Yeah.
If they sign T. Higgins or something.
So does Adam Thielen, honestly. And not to take anything away from what he's done. They don't have a number 1. I think they hoped Deontay Johnson would be it. Right. That didn't work out. They kind of gave up and moved on from Jonathan Mingo. They're another team. I know they've taken receivers high the last couple of years. Third time might be the charm.
Yeah, take it till you get the right one.
Yeah. Well, that'll do it for us today. We will be back on Friday with the conference championship previews, and then we are going to look at 5 players that we think could be traded from the teams that they are on this offseason, talk about what that might mean. So that'll be a little bit of fun, and we'll probably have some more coaching news. We'll see if the Jets get their act together with Aaron Glenn, see what happens with some of the other ones, maybe where some of these dominoes start falling now, for Jacksonville, for the Raiders. Now that Ben Johnson left, every team was apparently getting Ben Johnson. I've heard the Raiders' top contenders Pete Carroll. So that'd be a swell time.
Right.
If you got a long, lonely, and maybe frigid week ahead, Dennis, what can the people do to warm their hearts?
They can go to their favorite podcast platform, type in that search bar, Fantasy Football Roundtable Podcast, give us a subscribe, give us a like, leave us a rating and a review. That helps us out a ton. And then tell 2 friends about us too. Tell them to go do it. We'll work with exponentials.
That'll do it for us today. Hope you guys stay warm and safe out there, especially if you live in one of those southern states that is not sure what this frozen white precipitation falling from the sky is, that snow, you're probably better off, staying in your house while that's coming down. So plenty of episodes for you to listen to on the backlog.
Yeah, down there on the Gulf of America, the weather's going to shit.
You guys have a wonderful week. We'll see you on Friday.